Hi, Mickey.
Hey, Bob.
How you doing?
Okay. I'm dressed to indicate my elevated status in the blogosphere. I'm not one of those whippersnappers.
I'm wearing a festive spring shirt. What are you wearing that you refer to?
I'm wearing a sort of English style, actually English, cotton poplin jacket and a distinguished tie and a striped shirt from Costco. Kirkland brand, always good, $18. But they don't have to know that.
No, they don't. But they probably could use a little more about the context. What's the particular gimmick here again?
The gimmick is that I'm not a... There's this schism that I've tried to open up between criticizing the young whippersnappers on the web who sort of don't know what they're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's inevitable that if you have a medium as free as the web, and anybody can blog, that at some point people will start to decide, who they trust and who they don't. And, previously, young people who wanted to get into journalism would go apprentice for an organization like the Washington Monthly or the New Republic or Newsweek or the New York Times or the Trenton Times or their local paper.
Mm-hmm.
And after 10 years or so, maybe they would get 4 years, maybe they would get a byline in a major national publication. And in the process, they would be, trained by their editors, and they'd go out and cover the council meeting and learn how to get it right. And there'd be all sorts of initiation procedures. Now they have a blog on day one when they're in high school, and they take it from there.
I remember those days, yeah, back when it was different. And Mickey,
I prefer these days, but there was a recent incident involving Tom Edsall and John Alter where, experience counted for something, and I'm just open to the idea that experience counts for something. That's all.
So you see this now, but you sense actual fogey backlash against the young whippersnappers, right?
No, I just think intellectually it is. It can't be 100% good thing. There has to be, some downside to letting anybody all of a sudden report on anything. I just thought that it would be good to explore what that downside might be, and it was, rendered vivid by this incident where John Alter, where Thomas Edsall ran into Mike Gravel on the street in New York, and the reporter who was there thought that Edsall had seriously said that David Broder was the voice of the people. Well, anybody who knows Edsall, i.e. anybody who has some experience and has been around, knows that Edsall was joking, that he was just sort of mocking Gravel.
Does he tend to joke with a straight face?
Yes, totally straight face.
I know people like that.
And Gravel, of course, didn't understand it. The reporter thought, well, Edsall was serious, and then Atreus took up the cause of Edsall. He's in the, he's one of these Beltway people who thinks David Broder is actually the voice of the people. This shows what a horrible inbred group they are. And he got it wrong. And even Glenn Greenwald, after an exhaustive investigation, has decided this guy got it wrong.
Hey, Glenn Greenwald is on our site right now. Did you know that?
Oh, God, no. Really?
Hey, Mickey. It sounds like you want to challenge him to a duel.
I don't want to challenge anybody to a duel. You'll let anybody in, won't you?
Yeah. A number of people apparently so formidable that after you express your disdain toward them, you will not engage them in debate, which brings us back to a little of the context of your whole fogey argument that I think you glossed over.
Okay.
Perhaps not everyone is familiar with your little thing with Ezra Klein, a good example of the young blogger who doesn't get his credentials the old-fashioned way that you and I knew, although actually I don't think you got your credentials in any conventional fashion either.
Right. I don't have credentials. I'm a lousy journalist. I don't pretend to have those credentials.
Well, then what exactly is the basis for the fogey resentment?
Experience. Not credentials.
But you were just talking about credentials. You were talking about how they came up.
Right. Right. But I don't have those either. I agree. But all I'm saying is that they might count for something. That's all.
They might. But anyway, so you had this thing where you expressed disdain and disrespect for Ezra Klein, and then when he said, "Well, okay, let's have a debate on Blogging Heads TV," you didn't exactly, meet him halfway.
Well, there's this sense on blogging FTV that, hey, everybody's great and we got to like everybody and, gee, we're all blogging heads and isn't that great? Why? I didn't like what Ezra Klein wrote, so I said it. Why
no, but
can't
the
I say
point
that?
is that...
and I don't have to debate everybody who's writing I don't like.
Well,
them.
let me get to my grand theory here, okay?
Since then, he's written some better stuff that I linked to.
Yeah.
So.
I have a grand theory about your Fogey piece, okay?
Okay.
You use the Ezra Klein thing where you had expressed some, disdain toward Ezra Klein, and then, as we know, refused to debate him. And then you brought in this John Alter example, and you had one other example, and it was supposed to be some kind of trend, right? Three examples make a trend in the world of newspapers. That's one of the important principles, by the way, that you learn if you come up the old-fashioned way, right? Three anecdotes make a trend.
Well, no, I had Marty Parrott's getting rid of Spencer Ackerman and saying, what did this 15-year-old have do where did he get off calling somebody a fool?
My grand theory...
I had three examples of fogey disdain.
My grand theory is that you felt awkward and embarrassed after your Ezra Klein debacle. And, in fact, evidence that you're kind of walking your position back is that now you're saying nice things about him. Oh, he's gotten better. I'm changing my mind, blah, blah, blah. But basically what I think you're up to is trying to make it sound like you were just part of some broader trend involving fogies. Like your particular fit of pique was part of this broad fogey backlash, including John Alter and Marty Parrott's, when in fact, actually, I think yours was kind of sui generis. And for example, you said that in all cases the fogies come out looking bad and the younger one doesn't. Well, I know of one case in which that's arguably true, Mickey, but it certainly wasn't in John Alter's case.
In the other, yes, it did.
No,
yes,
it wasn't.
Was.
You said something like in all of these encounters, the old fogies do more damage to themselves than the other guy. Totally not true in John Alter's case. I thought he looked okay, but in any event, he did more damage to whoever that young journalist was because
the young journalist got it wrong. But Alter did also come off looking like a fogey because he made a big deal about how he'd bought a lunch and it was off the record, and then it turned out maybe it was on the record. And except for the fact that he got it wrong, the young guy came off looking well.
No,
I like Alter. He's a friend of mine, but he came off looking a bit like a fogey, as did I, as did Marty Parrott's dissing this guy who he'd employed. And the point is, it's a loser for the fogies.
No, it's not. Let me tell you why. First of all, Alter's was totally un-fogey related. What happened was somebody reported something that John said he had said to this guy, "This is off the record," okay, and the guy went ahead and reported it. And it does damage to that guy for the word to be out now that you can't trust him when he agrees that something is off the record. That's serious damage.
Did you read his response? He had a fairly effective response for the off-the-record charge, and he mocked Alter, and that's been picked up in some places on the blogosphere. The off-the-record charge, I thought he sort of won the debate, and John lost. But on the basic question of fact, John won. But the point is, I don't think that I wrote what I wrote because I looked bad. Although I did look bad, I agree I looked bad. But did you think Marty looked good dissing Spencer Ackerman?
Well, his was I didn't really think that was like a big deal.
Yeah.
It wasn't like Spencer then challenged him to a duel and Marty said sorry.
Old people always look good always look awful when they diss young people for not remembering World War II. And I remember I hated that when I was growing up, and people said, "Oh, you just don't remember Munich and how terrible it was, so that's why you're wrong about Vietnam." I mean, so it's a losing proposition. The interesting thing is that Matt Iglesias sort of took up the argument that maybe there's something to this, and he argued that the window is closing. There will be no more whippersnappers. That basically it's very hard for a young person to break into the blogosphere now because, just because the people like him and Ezra Klein are established. They're the new establishment, and you can't break in. I sort of don't think that's true. I think if you were a good writer, good 18-year-old writer, and you could start a blog and whip up some resentment, you could be huge. What do you think?
I think journalistic influence is more immediately accessible to young people still than it was when we were young. Not as accessible maybe as it was when Matt was in college and started blogging himself. But no, I wouldn't say like the gate is closed.
I mean, it's like because the young people are the audience, so they're going to go for an 18-year-old blogger.
But on the substantive question of whether this trains them, as well to do what they do, it's true that in some of the younger bloggers, I sometimes see things that I think would have been more clearly put if they had the discipline of writing, lead paragraphs for, Middletown, New Jersey or something, which coincidentally was in the circulation area of the newspaper I worked for when I was young. But but I do think when you say, well, in the old days they were taught to get it right, actually, I think the new blogging environment is more conducive to accuracy and intellectual honesty because the negative feedback from getting things wrong is more immediate and more penetrating. I mean, I well remember, like at the New Republic, somebody would write in and complain you got something wrong, and you'd think, well, yeah, kind of, maybe a little. And then the question would be, could you write a reply to their letter, right, that kind of made you look like relatively not bad? Because then that would be the end of it. Whereas in the blogosphere, these things get complete ventilation. And you're crazy not to admit right away that you got it wrong and to try to avoid that in the future.
I actually agree with that. I think that the old training didn't. The legitimate Fogarty argument doesn't have to do with the training and the apprenticeship. Although, my friends who covered Bosnia said that it was just like covering the Arlington City Council, only bigger, and that the training was very useful. And I couldn't cover Bosnia, because I haven't had that training. Yeah. But I agree that there's sort of standards of accuracy. That stuff is basically a load of hooey. But I do think experience counts. I think. Ezra Klein, I made some joke about how Ezra Klein wasn't born when Gary Hart ran. Well, he was born in 1984. That's when Gary Hart ran. So depending on what part of the year he was born in, he wasn't born when Gary Hart ran. And it helps to remember the Hart-Mondale debate if you're going to write about the Democratic Party. I'm sorry, you can read about it. But, there was a big debate over firing of teachers, and Mondale wouldn't allow the teachers should be fired, and Hart, forced him to admit that maybe some teachers should be fired. That's a debate that's still relevant today. It helps if you remember that. That was a fascinating reminisce. Are you in a rocking chair at this moment by any chance?
Please, that's a cheap shot.
Alarmingly, while you've been talking about this, I have noticed in my hair this incredibly broad gray streak on the top. I mean, previously I thought myself as like a Gray Temples kind of guy. This thing is like Interstate 95, like running.
Well, I would be happy to have a broad gray streak on top of my head, Bob, because that would mean that there was hair on top.
I'm sorry, Mickey. I was insensitive. I forgot about your special handicap.
I'm the victim. I'm the victim here.
So you do not buy my penetrating psychological analysis of the motivation that led you to write this Fogey item? You really don't see it? It's so obvious.
Well, misery loves company, sure, if I could...
Okay, the whole thing was this positioning thing where you want to act like your epic blunder was part of a larger trend of epic blunders being committed by Fogies everywhere, right?
As usual, Bob, I was motivated by pure intellectual dialectic. I thought there was an interesting trend here, and... one tries as a blogger to get on the trends first. And there was a trend of old people reacting, finally stopping saying, aren't these young bloggers great, and reacting against them. Now there are other folks like Tim Rutten of the LA Times and the late David Shaw who've been doing this for years. And that company I don't want.
Okay.
But anyway, so I'm taking off my jacket to indicate my...
Okay, well maybe you're right about this and everything I said is wrong.
Sorry? No. What?
I said maybe you're right.
No, I agree with you. I think this idea that the Trenton Times provided this training that bloggers can't possibly duplicate is probably mostly bogus.
No, I think there were virtues to the old system.
I just wish some of these people who are attacking Kinsley and neoliberals, knew what the hell they were talking about.
The youngins, yeah.
The youngins. Ezra Klein interviews Charlie Peters and says, God, I never realized this about neoliberalism. You mean you're anti-war? You mean you're not just positioning yourself for effect? You mean you actually have ideals? You support national health care? Gee.
Well, maybe he should have realized that before he dismissed us in a blog. Huh.
Hey, Mickey, remember
So
our
there.
last dialogue when I was criticizing John Chait's Netroot piece, and you said, with implicit reference to your Ezra Klein dust-up, you said, well, maybe you should debate John Chait, Bob. Remember that?
Yes, I was mocking you.
Yeah. Well, guess what?
You're debating John Chait.
It's already happened, buddy. Not on the site yet, but it's happened. Okay?
Who won?
Not me, I think. I don't think I did a very good job. I actually, but anyway, we'll let the suspense grow.
I forget, what were you debating about?
His Netroots piece.
Oh, okay.
Okay,
I still
so
forgot.
should we move on to Iraq?
Yes, I forget what his veterans piece was about, but
Well, we spent a long time on it.
I know.
No, I know, but this is what being a fogey does to your brain. It's
Absolutely.
yesterday might as well have been, 19th century. So, Iraq.
Yes.
I'm
letting you start.
Do you have important things to say? You were really hyping this Mort Kondraki plan.
Well, I thought the Mort Kondraki piece was interesting. First, it outlined a plausible plan B for Iraq if the surge doesn't work. And Mort's plan B is we let the Shiites win and just make sure our Shiites win, and our Shiites being the Maliki government and I think SCIRI, S-C-I-R-I. The important fact that
which
I
has
didn't know-
renamed itself, by the way.
Okay.
There's no longer the word revolution is no longer in there, and that's
Cool.
considered a good sign by some people that it wants to send that establishment-oriented vibe.
But
Anyway,
the
go ahead.
The basic fact that I didn't know of is that Iran has shifted its allegiance and now backs al-Sadr instead of SCIRI.
I hadn't heard that either. Are we totally out of the loop, or is Mort kind of?
It was a weirdly informed piece for Mort to write.
Well, I think it seemed to be all informed by one anonymous congressional source who had cooked up this whole plan and had several comments that were worth quoting, although he remains anonymous. We don't know who it is, he or she.
Right, but Sadr is in Iraq. Was going back and forth to Iran, so it's not implausible that he would have the backing of the Iranians. I don't know why the Iranians would pick a horse at this point. Why wouldn't they be for both?
I seriously doubt that it's as clear as was implied. But in any event, do you want to summarize Mort's plan?
Piece is if the surge doesn't work, well then we say, okay, 80% of the country is either Kurdish or Shiite. Let's back 80%. Let's let them beat the Sunnis and just let them ethnically cleanse Baghdad. There'll be atrocities. There'll be massive refugee flows. And the only thing is, the upside for us is that we'll make sure that our Shiites win, and we'll somehow get credit for that within the Shiite community because we will have, provided our military might to tip the balance to Maliki as opposed to Sadr. I have some problems with that, but at least it is a plausible plan B. It seems like a pretty horrible plan B, and the fact that we're thinking about plan B makes plan A less likely to succeed, of course.
I don't know about that. My reaction was certainly like, if this is the best alternative available, you better hope the surge works. What were your problems with this plan B?
Well, what makes us think that we can engineer the right Shiites winning? I mean, Sadr has a huge following in Sadr City. If you read Juan Cole's blog,
right.
It's growing all the time. So what makes us think we can engineer this weak leader, our guys winning? What makes us think if SCIRI and Maliki win, what makes us think they'll be so grateful to us, and that they won't turn on us? And what's the difference if they turn on us? As long as they're inhospitable to Al Qaeda, what do we care?
True, and it seemed to me in that sense just to kind of sustain the illusion that got us into this in the first place, which was the idea that it's really pretty easy to micromanage events in a country that you are more or less totally clueless about, and now it's even worse because it's in a state of chaotic flux. So that seemed to me quite an ambitious assumption.
Well, it seems to be the only reason we're really there at the moment, since the people in Anbar are throwing out Al Qaeda, but that would happen even if we weren't there, is to prevent a genocide. And if the plan B is, okay, let the genocide happen,
that's losing. That's not.
Well, not only that,
that's
it's
not
like,
plan
let's
B.
identify ourselves with the people perpetrating the genocide. I mean, he would not say it's genocide, but he's pretty explicit in saying, yes, the Shiites would commit ethnic cleansing, and yes, we would be on the side of the Shiites. And I'm not really sure that's the reputation I want to have throughout
Well,
the Sunni world. You know, I don't know.
Getting to pick our Shiite leader is not worth having the reputation of having backed an anti-Sunni genocide.
Well, and particularly in the Sunni world, I mean, he says, you know, a big deal here is then we would get credit for the Shiite victory among Shiites, whereas if we leave and they win, we don't get credit. Well, yeah, but on the other hand, then we get blame among all the Sunnis, which is most of the world's Muslims, after all.
Good point.
And so this seems to me, I think we'd definitely be better off, at least in terms of national interest, leaving rather than do this.
Right. Can I? I've been trying to figure out the conditions that would lead me to agree with the left that that we should get out. And the obvious one is if somehow you could make a convincing argument that the genocide wouldn't happen, which I guess would involve some militias just existing to kick us out, and once we leave, somehow they go out of business. I'm not convinced. I don't think militias go out of business. But what did we learn from Eli Lake? I only saw little snatches of your last dialogue.
We learned that, in my view, he's actually better on TV than a lot of people on real TV. Not that this is fake TV, but
Exactly. That's not a distinction we want to
no
encourage.
No. This is real. This is this is realer. This is reality TV.
There you go.
But I mean, I came away, not that he said any of this, but in reflecting on it, it was clearer to me at the end that there are these two opposing tensions that make it hard to figure out what a smart thing to do would be. I mean, on the one hand, the Sunni Shiite tension is pretty formidable, and I think that's what's reflected in the fact that the Shiite government is not playing ball with us. And he reported this, that although we are having some success maybe with these Sunni tribal leaders who on their own, I think, decided that they wanted to turn on al-Qaeda, we may be having some success in kind of facilitating that and getting them on our side. The Shiite government is not playing ball. They do not want to see those people, these Sunni tribal leaders left with arms in their hand and so on. And when you think about it, I mean, it seems to me this is not just a property of the particular Shiites who happen to be in power in the government right now, but probably represents a deeper tension between Shiites and Sunnis.
Interesting.
On a broad, I mean, that's not what he said. I think he, like a lot of supporters of the war who are trying to be optimistic, would like to think that if we could just change the government one more time, everything would be different. It's not clear to me that that's the case or how we would do it. But in any event, when you look at it in a larger regional perspective and stay focused on the Shiite-Sunni tension, it seems to me you have these are the opposing tensions I was actually talking about in terms of whether it's good to get out. You know, the trouble with getting out is commonly said to be that if we get out, it's full-scale warfare, if proxy warfare between, like, Saudi Arabia and Iran, okay?
Right.
Saudi Arabia starts treating Iraq the way we treated Afghanistan against the Soviets, flooding it with arms and so on. And then who knows what can happen regionally. And that may be true.
Okay.
On the other hand, if you ask why is Iran causing all the trouble that they're causing, I think a lot of it is because we are there. I mean, let's look at this thing from their point of view. I mean, and this gets to really how ill-advised Bush was to say some of the things he said and do some of the things he did. He said there is this axis of evil consisting of three countries, including Iraq and Iran. You know, we will not rest until the regimes are whatever. You know, that was pretty clearly the message. Then he invades Iraq and deposes that regime, and that's right next door to Iran. Now, given what he had said, how can Iran possibly react by doing anything other than what it's doing, which is, by whatever means are at its disposal, trying to kill American soldiers and get the Americans out of there? any rational nation in the world under those circumstances would do that, right? I mean, right? Does that make sense to you?
Yep, I've never bought the argument that the problem with withdrawing is it will lead to a large regional Sunni-Shiite war that would draw in Saudi Arabia and Iran. That always seems to be foreign policy, big thing gone wild. Does Saudi Arabia want a war with Iran? I don't think so. Does Iran want a war with Saudi Arabia? Probably not. They would probably balk. The problem with withdrawing is that before it settled down, there are 1 million Sunnis left in Baghdad. A lot of them would be killed.
Right, but
it's a humanitarian reason, not a geopolitical reason. You're the one who was promoting the geopolitical reason before, and I always thought it was BS.
No, I think things could spin out of control. You could have a proxy war that turns into a real war thing. I think that could well happen. I mean,
then what you just said isn't true, because you said it was only our presence that was encouraging the Iranians.
Well, my position is we're looking at two horns of a dilemma. The other thing I said I think is true, which is that we do have the motivation to leave that. That's the only way to get Iran to have an interest in stability. So long as we're there, they have an interest in instability. They want to destabilize our presence until we leave, okay? And yet, when we leave, unless Saudi Arabia can be reassured, they are going to be sufficiently concerned about Iran that they would probably tend to escalate the conflict. So it's just this mess we're in. I don't see a contradiction between the two things I'm saying.
What is so terrifying to Saudi Arabia about Iran that they would want to foment a bloody civil war in Iraq? Wouldn't that if their concern is their local Shiite population, that's going to rile them up more than just reaching some sort of accommodation with Iran. And there's a big zero-sum bonus to pumping a lot of oil and everybody gets rich. I mean, does Iran want to take over Mecca? I mean, what is that Saudi Arabia so scared of?
Well, in terms of riling up the local Shiites, I mean, I think that is a big part of their concern, the Shiite population within Saudi Arabia. I think their plan would be to, their fear is that Iran will turn, will create this pan-Shiite solidarity that cuts across the Persian and Arab worlds. The Saudi Arabia counterattack, in terms of propaganda, would be, I think, to depict it as a Persian-Arab struggle. That's what they'd be trying to do. And meanwhile, they would be funneling arms into people who are killing people who are armed by the Iranians. Anyway, people who know a lot about the region say that Saudi Arabia would be very alarmed. But, at the same time, I don't think Iran is going to have an interest in stability until either we leave or they are assured that we are going to systematically leave. Because we have said we are the enemy of Iran and we will not rest until that regime is deposed. Bush has been very clear about that. And this is one of the things that some people were pointing out, not me probably, but some people before the war started, that you would be in this position.
Can we pull out and then still attack Iran and destroy their nukes? That would be one face-saving way for the administration to pull out. If you look at it in sort of crude schoolyard adolescent honor terms.
Yeah.
Reagan pulled out of Lebanon and attacked Grenada. That sort of covered the pull out of Lebanon. We pull out of Iraq and blow it off the front page by attacking Iran's nuclear.
Well,
facilities.
would it? In terms of the variable I worry most about, which is abetting the recruitment of terrorists. And by the way, I actually have a factoid about that. I think it would be in that sense not win-win. I mean, I think a lot of propaganda value would be had by terrorist recruiters in our bombing Iran. On the other hand, the leaving Iraq part would at least, would put an end to one storyline that is abetting terrorist recruiting. New York Times a couple weeks ago had this piece on how extremism had grown in Jordan and how terrorists suicide bombers had been created. And there's a quote from a woman who had decided to start wearing a veil. She says, religion was something we just got from our parents, but after the war started, we decided we have to show the world we are Muslims. I started wearing the, veil to show the world I'm a Muslim, and the similar, it traced actual suicide bombers who who said more or less the same thing about their motivation.
This is your factoid.
This is just a little, just to remind, it's just that it's happening. I mean, on the side of withdrawal is the fact that every day, this is good propaganda. That's not to say something worse couldn't happen if we pulled out, but...
No, I had the same impulse when I was traveling through Germany. I wanted to wear a Mogen David, an impulse I've never had again in my life, because I wanted to show these Germans that I was a Jew. So I understand this veil thing that woman said, yes.
Huh. This is largely unrelated, but when we were in Israel in the early 80s, we were getting these weird looks, and then we realized that Lisa happened to be wearing this scarf that was exactly the Palestinian colors, and she had this kind of like Army Commando type jacket on. Anyway, when she quit wearing it, we got a very warm reception.
Anyway, does that... I thought I had one hopeful thing, which is like a pathetic weak read, which is that the Iraqi parliament balking at these deals we want them to sign to reassure the Sunnis. We want them to sign a new de-Baathification law that lets some people in, lets some old Baath people in the lower levels of the ministries, let them get their old jobs back. We want them to sign this oil allocation law that will reassure Sunnis that they'll get a share of the oil revenue. And they're balking, and they're like threatening to go on vacation, although their vacation has been cut short. But the point is, they wouldn't balk if they didn't take the laws seriously. In other words, the assumption is that once they pass the law, it actually will have an effect, which is a good sign. It seems to me if they were really determined to basically rip apart Iraq, and they would pass the law and then just ignore it.
So the fact that no constructive laws are getting passed in Iraq is good news, because the refusal to pass them is recognition of the constructiveness the laws would have if they were passed.
Well, it's a recognition of the rule of law, that actually there's a government there that would have an effect, and if they allocate the oil revenues to the Sunnis actually will get the oil revenues.
Yeah.
I mean, otherwise they would sign it and say, and then they just wouldn't deliver the revenues.
It's kind of like the war itself. Works on paper,
Okay, well, I said it was grasping at straws.
So you sent me this list of like right-wing people to read on Iraq, but I guess we're done with Iraq.
What was your defense to having turned Blogging Heads into a neocon propaganda outlet?
My defense was there was a guy in Baghdad that we could get on Blogging Heads TV. Need I elaborate?
Glenn Greenwald was not available.
Glenn Greenwald was not. No, I said, look, I had actually said the same thing to Spencer Ackerman that I said to Eli. Before both of them went to Iraq, I said, bring a camera and we'll do a Blogging Heads from there. Spencer, I caught him at the last moment, didn't. Eli happens to have a computer with a camera built in. The rest is history.
The right is always better funded.
The right is always better funded.
There you go.
That's true. So they're better at subsidizing us to spread their propaganda.
Actually, there's a transition here.
Excellent.
To Fred Thompson's use of a video camera. He happened to have one sitting around his study when Michael Moore challenged him to a debate. He produced a very quick, quite funny video, sort of slapping down Michael Moore and saying, your buddy Castro throws documentary filmmakers in a mental institution. You might think about that, Michael, a mental institution. And this has sort of blown away a whole bunch of bloggers who say, we've seen the future, and if Fred Thompson can keep this up, he's just going to lap the whole field, because he can churn out these quickie videos. He obviously has a very quick reaction time. He's, in the James Boyd fighter pilot sense, he's within the other person's reaction loop, and he's going to win the dogfight. And that assumes that these web videos, have an impact. And the argument is that Thompson's video had more of an impact than the whole Republican debate last night. I don't quite believe that. But it does show that Thompson is sort of pretty formidable, I think, as a real candidate, not just an internet candidate.
Yeah, it was him as a successful actor using state-of-the-art video technology, just as Ronald Reagan used state-of-the-art video technology, and he turned out to be a formidable candidate. They were both, at the top of their form, more or less, when they ran.
it was even more impressive than Reagan. I don't know if Reagan could have turned something around within hours like that.
He didn't have to in those days. That's what I mean. I mean, Reagan was, he was state of the art. He played the game, as well as it had to be played. Now
enough.
Fred Thompson seems able to do the same thing.
Fair enough. So he's the faster version of Reagan.
Yeah, in a faster age. I mean, well, we don't know how fast Reagan would have been if he had to turn him around. I've got a feeling his people would have gotten the camera in his office pronto. And how fast was the actual reaction time on this? Do you know? In hours or what?
I think it was hours. It depends whether he got advanced word of Michael Moore's challenge or not. It was hours.
I mean, I would think the video, to the extent that it's seen, is certainly effective among Michael Moore haters. And there are no Michael Moore lovers voting in the Republican primary.
Exactly, exactly. And there are not that many Castro lovers in the general electorate either.
No.
So, with the lesson of politics in this last week is, go ahead, beat up the straw man. It'll help you. That's what Giuliani learned with Ron Paul last night. If you could find a convenient target to beat up, hey, you're going to look pretty big. And that's why Giuliani supposedly won the debate last night.
Oh, did he? Yeah, the Ron Paul, but it's interesting, I mean, first of all, okay, I am not watching the Republican debates until the field gets narrowed down sufficiently that I no longer think there are some people up debating that we could probably get on Blogging Heads TV. Okay?
Well, I think Tancredo will come on Blogging Heads TV, in a couple months.
And you think he'll still be around? Well, I was thinking Ron Paul. I was thinking we could probably get Ron Paul on, and so long as there's people like that up, I ain't watching. But
Ron Paul was very effective in the first debate. It's in the second debate
actually, I'm not sure how ineffective he was. He got a smack. I did watch this on YouTube, the 4-minute clip of him and Giuliani, and for people who didn't watch it, it was him saying, taking a quasi-isolationist. Well, that's not really but the point is he was saying, look, the blowback of terrorism is blowback for American foreign policy.
Right. He said it was, and he specifically said it was blowback for the first Gulf War. In other words, we are there bombing, Saddam Hussein when he shot at our planes. We did this little tit for tat retaliation. We have the sanctions, and that the blowback from that the Bush's Iraq I war in defense of Kuwait was a large motivation for Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda's attacks, and that's what set Giuliani off.
Well, actually, he could have put it in a more plausible form, because I think it is the truth that the troops we left in Saudi Arabia as a result of that war are, by many accounts, I think, what triggered almost a conversion experience in bin Laden.
That's why Giuliani, if he said our troops in Saudi Arabia, I think Giuliani wouldn't have looked as good. He basically said, because we bombed Saddam when he shot at our planes, that this somehow caused blowback, and it made it sound like legitimate acts of self-defense we shouldn't do because those Arabs might be offended. Well, so that's what gave Giuliani his opening.
Yeah, it's also true though that during that period, there was there was these UN sanctions, and we were doing some bombing, and I forget which one of these was associated with footage of Iraqi children suffering and dying in hospitals. But that footage was effective propaganda.
Right. The interesting right-wing position is, yes, it was effective propaganda. Yes, it was helping Al-Qaeda. That's why we had to topple Saddam Hussein, because the pre our invasion of Iraq, the status quo was helping Al-Qaeda because we had these sanctions. They were killing children. What was the way? That would still be going on if we hadn't invaded and toppled Saddam. So that's the interesting thing. Stephen Spruill in a post on the Corner, I think, said, you're right. Paul is right, but that's why we had to invade, because we were at a stalemate in our position with Saddam, and we were only helping Al-Qaeda by starving his children. Right,
but Giuliani in reply didn't say anything as high-minded or sophisticated or complex as that. What he did was a standard ploy that works by virtue of human nature, which is, he said, are you saying we invited 9/11? In other words, the way that's taken is, are you saying we are to blame for 9/11? Well, now, you will know that enlightenment has arrived on the planet when people find it easy to separate the question of who is morally to be held accountable for something, separate that question from what was the cause of them doing it,
Well,
right?
But there's a question there. You were for the first Gulf War, as I remember, and if that caused Al Qaeda, Ron Paul wasn't.
Actually, I was not. I was not for it. I had a complicated position. I was not for it. I had a position I would no longer defend because it wouldn't have. I realized how ineffectual it would have been. I was going to confine our response to retaliatory bombing, but that was.
I was there. You were for it.
No. Go find. No, Mickey. I wrote a piece for the New Republic saying, "Don't invade, do bomb in retaliatory fashion." It's there. You will not find anything else in the written record.
Well, the written record.
I did not support it. Look, I was off on an island writing a book. Okay, I wasn't. I wrote one piece, and that was it. And it's in the archives, and that was before email. So you and I were not. With an ocean between us, you weren't doing a lot of talking to me. But anyway,
you were there at the New Republic. I was right down the hall, and we were all supportive of the war, and we were rewarded by having Dick Cheney come for an off-the-record lunch. As I remember, you liked the war because it was punishing transborder aggression, which is the first principle of world government.
No, I think I later look. First of all, when we invaded, I definitely was not in Washington D.C. or on the continent. Okay. I may have been there when he invaded Kuwait, but I think what you're thinking about is when I later said this war was a successful and valid exercise of the United Nations Charter, because it was transborder aggression. We published it. We punished it under the auspices of the UN and so on. I think you're thinking. I don't think anybody out there actually cares, but I assure you, you're thinking about things I wrote after the war when it seemed successful. I wanted to identify myself with it or something.
The relevant point now is that Giuliani wasn't just being a Neanderthal. He was also saying, you're saying we shouldn't have done what we did in the first Gulf War. And that's a much more...
Well, no, but he was being a Neanderthal to the extent that he was trying to conflate an inquiry into causes of terrorism that we could choose not to replicate in the future with the question of, are we morally responsible for 9/11? One can separate the questions. Yes, the people who fly planes into buildings are the ones morally responsible. But it's worth asking why they did it if that could help us prevent it in the future without compromising any other interests.
Right, but that's the dilemma that people on your side and my side face, which is any worry about blowback sort of slides down a slippery slope toward appeasement. If you don't say, these people are bad, we should stand up against them.
No, Mickey, I think that's a separate...
It begins to look like you're not taking the moral position.
No, Mickey, that is a valid question. To take into account the incentives you're creating is a valid question. In other words, if you say, well, if we don't send troops into Saudi Arabia next time, they'll take that as appeasement and do even more. Well, that's an argument. What I'm saying is different, okay? I'm saying he is conflating that whole category of analysis about what we should do in the future in light of what the first tragedy's causes were with saying, you, America, are to blame for what happened. Giuliani, in his response, was implying that if you do an earnest and intelligent and just earnest job of asking, did we do anything that we could not do in the future that caused this, and so save ourselves the trouble in the future, that to ask that question and come up with any answer at all is to say, we are morally responsible, the terrorists aren't. It's that whole conflation Giuliani was playing on. He did it masterfully. Human nature makes it easy to do. It lowered him in my esteem. He doesn't care. It was good for him. Fine.
If by not prosecuting the first Gulf War, we could have forestalled the 9/11 attacks, and we did prosecute the first Gulf War, and the 9/11 attacks were the predictable consequence of that, then to some extent we are responsible, aren't we?
Morally?
Yeah.
No, if you do something that is itself morally valid, as the war itself was,
Well, it's morally valid, but morally valid, you have to look at all the consequences down the road, and one of the consequences is that Al-Qaeda got really pissed off that we had troops there.
Well, A, if you're a utilitarian, and B, you do your analysis in retrospect, but we're getting into complicated terrain. I'm mainly complaining about the way Giuliani said, when he said, so you're saying we invited it. The way that was taken in the debate hall was, so you're saying it's our fault. And that's the conflation that is just counterproductive and is Neanderthal. And probably as long as people think that way, the planet is doomed, because we will do stupid things in response to terrorism.
My point is it's harder to separate out the two than you seem to indicate.
I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think so. I think, well, I mean, it's an interesting question that you know, this I'll bring this up at the end. Remind me, I'm writing it down. I'm going to bring this up at the end.
Okay. Well, so you want to leave this exciting exploration of outmoded human nature and talk about trade.
Yeah, and because we're running behind, I'm going to confine it to about 45 seconds. This is not even worthy of being a topic.
Okay, I thought I had two things to say about it, but go ahead.
Okay. I'll leave you a lot of time to say them.
Okay, go ahead.
Democratic leaders agreed with President Bush on these trade deals with two small countries, I guess Peru and Panama. What's revolutionary is that a Republican president is agreeing that they will have labor accords in them, so that the countries we're doing the deal with, to comply with the deal, will have to make it legal for workers in their countries to organize, and they'll have to do some other things, I think, regarding child labor. But anyway, this has been a hobby horse of mine for probably 15 years. It's the way that I think international trade has to go. First of all, if it's going to be politically viable in America to pursue free trade, and secondly, it just follows from the logic of political evolution in a lot of ways.
What exactly is this right to organize? Do these foreign countries have to adopt the whole Wagner Act? I mean, I'm not sure the United States should even adopt the Wagner Act, so why should that be the basis for our requirements of other countries?
I don't know enough about the Wagner Act to say.
The right to organize doesn't just, in the United States, it doesn't just mean that if you and a bunch of other people want to go out on strike, you can go out on strike. That's fine. The Wagner Act says that if 51% of you decide to join a union, you are the sole exclusive bargaining agent for the other 49%. So the other 49% gets screwed. It's a very specific grant of sort of quasi-governmental jurisdiction to the body of existing workers of a company. 51% of them rule. Why should we require other countries to do that? And do we, in fact?
Well, I'm pretty sure that the wording is vague enough such that if instead of that they said 95% instead of 51-49, it would be in compliance with the law. But I don't know for sure.
And the other point is that as living standards increase, all these things become much easier to do. Obviously, right?
What do you mean?
In other words, there's less of a grounds for it's less hard for China to ban exploitative labor when Chinese laborers are so well paid because they've done so well in the world economy that there's no question that they aren't being exploited. This fits in with your non-zero arrow of history point. As global prosperity increases, it becomes increasingly easier to get this sort of labor accord. No?
Well, easier to get the labor accord and less important from the point of view of American labor. I mean, the more foreign workers are being paid, the less threatening they are to American labor to begin with.
Well, that too.
Yeah.
I agree.
But it'll be a while before that's like a blanket description of the world. I mean, there's a lot of low-wage labor that hasn't been tapped yet.
Well, but you're still, China will have a huge cost advantage over the United States in, let's say, the production of automobiles, even though their wages are well past the ruthlessly exploitative level. Are you saying that we should encourage the Chinese to adopt counterproductive union-oriented work rules so that their auto industry becomes just as crippled as ours?
No.
Okay. Well, it just seems to me that they'll still the deals will be a reasonable deal will be easier to cut at a Chinese wage level that's still mighty threatening to UAW workers in Detroit. That's my.
Wait, say that again. Point. Sorry.
I guess maybe it's a bogus point. I thought that it sort of takes a weapon out of unions' hands because, the reasonable deals they can cut, which is you shouldn't pay people 1 cent an hour, you shouldn't have child labor, become easier to enforce as countries get rich. Yet
yet that it's still not at a level that allows the UAW to compete with Chinese workers. It's just so that reasonable labor restrictions no longer serve labor's purpose of actually impeding trade. You can cut the deals, and the trade will happen, and the American workers will get screwed.
No, I would imagine it's the kind of thing that works at the margins and, for example, slows the outflow of jobs enough for us to adapt more gracefully and things like that. I would think it works at the margins. It's not going to fundamentally reverse the auto industry, imbalance. But, we're at like 50 minutes. If you're about to go on an immigration tirade, we better reserve some time for that.
Well, this is was supposed to be crunch week for the immigration bill in the Senate. They had a deadline of yesterday. They've now extended the deadline until Monday. What seems to be happening is that the Republican point man, Senator Kyle, is caving to the Bush administration in what seems to be a very disreputable way. He's accepting amnesty for existing illegals in exchange for harsh restrictions on future guest workers. Both of those seem wrong. Accepting amnesty now will encourage more people, it seems to me, to come here in the hope of yet another amnesty once they're in place. And why screw the future guest workers? If they come here legally, why shouldn't they become citizens? Why should they have to go home? It seems to me we don't want a situation where people legally working in the country somehow are second-class citizens and can never become Americans if they're actually working here. So it's this very disreputable attempt to buy off the so-called Yahoo right wing by screwing the guest workers in this future program, and in exchange for that, Bush and the Democrats and the Latino groups get their amnesty. It's the worst of both worlds, and that's what's coming down the pike in the Senate. The two interesting things are, first, there's an interesting zero-sum question, Bob, and I know you like those. It can't be good for both the Democrats and the Republicans to pass this bill. The Democrats think, well, gee, we should pass this bill or else we'll be tarred as a do-nothing Congress. The Republicans think, gee, we better pass this bill because it'll help us in the election by getting the issue off the table. It can't help both of them. Somebody's going to win the election, somebody's going to lose. So one of those people is wrong. Usually what happens is, toward the end of the term, congressmen begin to worry about their own seats. And they say, well, who cares what party controls Congress? This is going to help me retain my seat because it's popular. That's what happened with welfare reform. That's why anything gets passed at all. Because the pro-incumbent, the incumbents begin to worry about their own skins. But that assumes that immigration reform is popular, and it'll help incumbents, and I'm just not sure it is. You can say anything you want at this point.
Well, I'd say, the question of why, given the zero-sum relationship between the two parties in a two-party system, the question of why it would pass is a question you could apply to anything that passes with bipartisan support, and I assume You've got the right answer, that individual incentives override party allegiance, maybe, generically.
But right now in the press you see an argument either way, as if this could help somehow both the Republicans and the Democrats, which it can't.
It's a common seeming fallacy in coverage of politics, is that the deal was good for both sides. Now, in baseball, a deal can be good for both teams because they are not the only two teams in the game.
Right. And the obvious answer that I didn't talk about on my blog is it could help Democrats retain Congress and Republicans win the presidency. In other words, Pelosi could save her own control of Congress at the expense of screwing whatever Democratic candidate is running for president.
But in that event, if Republicans supporting it according to that logic are either Republican Congress people are either incredibly devoted to the party in a kind of strange way or kind of not comprehending what's going on, right?
Well, if they're loyal to Bush and all Bush cares about is ensuring a Republican president who's going to carry on the Iraq War.
Yeah. No, I like your first explanation.
But my first explanation implies it's not going to happen. I don't think, because I don't think incumbents generally get a lot of points with the voters for passing this wonderful amnesty plan. I think voters don't want mean racist rhetoric, and they want people to seem to be mean to these nice undocumented workers. But beyond that, I don't think there's an incredible demand for amnesty the way there was for welfare reform.
You know a lot more about this than I do, so I'm not in a position to either argue with you or agree. Although the general principle you outlined earlier, that immigrants who come to America through the legitimate avenues, such as a guest worker program, should be rewarded. I subscribe to that principle.
The other point is people ask, why do I care so much about immigration reform? Well, I don't want to lower the wages of the unskilled. I don't want to have vast income inequalities. And I don't want to have potential for a, secessionist or, irredentist movement toward Mexico, since the vast majority of these people, illegal immigrants, are Mexicans. Barney Frank admitted, interestingly, that it would lower the wages of blue-collar workers, but said, hey, we'll make it up for you because all these Latinos are going to be Democrats, so we're going to have more unions, so it's this double bank shot. First we screw the unskilled workers, but hey, we're going to make it up to you because these unions are going to be wonderful. Does anybody believe that? I mean, there is in a nutshell what's wrong with modern liberalism is that it relies on these complicated mechanisms like unions that haven't delivered, won't deliver, and instead we should raise wages just by limiting immigration and letting the labor market do its work.
Well, it's not totally implausible that he could wind up being right as a matter of future history, right?
Well, it's plausible that it would screw blue-collar workers and encourage unionism. What is implausible to me is that then that unionism will result in raising the wages at the bottom higher than it would have been if you hadn't had the immigration in the first place and you had a tight labor market, and wages just rose the way they did in the late 90s because employers were bidding for the services of unskilled workers.
But if you think that labor unions have a deleterious effect on American competitiveness, you must believe that at least in the short run, it delivers costly benefits to workers.
No, it's a deadweight loss because it leads to the destruction of productivity. It's not that
in the long run, you would say that.
In the short run. You want blogging heads to unionize, Bob? Would you think that would increase productivity of blogging heads if Ezra Klein and Spencer Ackerman went out on strike because you had turned it into a neocon outlet by letting Eli Lake blog from Baghdad? Would that help you run blogging heads?
That's a harrowing prospect, Mickey. I hadn't thought of that.
I may actually start organizing a card check. All I need is the cards from 50% of the blogging heads, and you're out, baby.
That's true. So long as I'm not allowed to approach any other bloggers anywhere in the world. I think the world is a lot of scabs floating around in the blogosphere, I think. But anyway, I want to return to the subject of whether zero is too little for you to be paid for these things, Mickey, later. But
you want to actually have me, I should pay you.
That is a thought that has crossed my mind.
Zero isn't low enough.
Right.
Okay. We have one more topic, though.
We do. And I guess we've exhausted. I still think that for you to say productivity drops is to say that in the short run, the costs of labor go up, and those costs presumably go to the workers in the short run, don't they? We pay them more money, we give them more benefits, right?
Well, not necessarily. They do get more benefits, but I think they take a lot of it out in leisure time. In other words,
well, that's a benefit.
Well, right, okay.
I'm saying he could be right that in the short term we will deliver benefits, even though you would claim that, well, that'll make us less competitive. Although you may have forgotten about the coming labor accords and trade treaties, Mickey.
Yeah. Well, I think the argument is, and this is the argument of the unions, is these jobs can't be outsourced. So, a barber, you can't have a barber in India cut your hair. You can't have a janitor in India clean up your building. So, if
actually, you can imagine robotic scissors on your desktop that are controlled via the internet by a barber in India.
Yeah. Well, all sorts of things can be outsourced now that we didn't think could be outsourced, but that's one of the flaws in the argument. Yes, but that is the argument. The argument is that once we've outsourced all the jobs that we can, that the jobs that are left we can unionize and we have employees over a barrel. One of the obvious problems is that this bill isn't going to stop illegal immigration. So if Andy Stern decides to unionize people, there's a whole bunch of
people in El Salvador are going to come and take the jobs for less. If he really, if he really thinks the border controls in the immigration reform plan are going to work, he's blowing smoke. That's the other flaw in his argument.
As always, I graciously let you have the last word.
But I agree, I haven't quite got what's wrong with this argument, except that it's incredibly complicated. It's an incredibly complicated way to raise wages at the bottom when there's a simple way, i.e. stopping immigration or restricting it, that we know will do the job. Anyway, okay.
Okay.
I'm through.
Well, we were going to talk about Rupert Murdoch?
The Indian version of me will be much less loquacious.
Would be much less what?
When you replace me with an Indian, he'll be a lot less loquacious. We can quickly talk about Rupert Murdoch.
Okay. Do you have any thoughts? I mean, he wants to buy Dow Jones, including the Wall Street Journal.
Yes. My thoughts are, first, what he's done with Fox. Fox is a fake news organization. It's biased. It's not a real news organization. Rupert Murdoch controls a lot. We don't want him also to control the Wall Street Journal. Second, if he can do this to the Wall Street Journal, which is controlled by a family with special voting rights, why can't somebody else do that to the New York Times, which is controlled by a family with special voting rights? Apparently the family doesn't want to sell to him, but they're worried about lawsuits from the other shareholders if they don't, because he's offered such a huge premium.
Here's one thing that puzzles
why can't
me.
you do the same thing with the Salzburgers?
Well, I mean, both of these. Well, of course, I think the New York Times. Do they both have this setup where?
Yes.
Family. There are two classes of stock, and one has
Yes.
tremendous voting rights, and the other doesn't.
Yes, and so the Salzburgers have driven the stock through the floor, and if you invest in the company, you're taking it on the chin. If without the Salzburgers, it would be worth a lot more. Why can't Rupert Murdoch then bid for the New York Times?
But I thought when I wrote those columns for the Times, there was a big rebound of the stock right in the wake of that, wasn't there? No?
But that's dissipated, the Bob Wright bubble. I made a fortune, that's how only, I made a fortune by,
Selling short?
lying on the knowledge that you would boost the stock.
Yeah, here's
and then
my
I shorted
question.
it when you left.
The family that controls the Wall Street Journal, they may have
Bankrupt.
grounds for not selling to Rupert Murdoch, but I don't see how they could be ideological grounds. Because the Wall Street Journal has one of the most famously right-wing editorial pages in the history of the universe. It is part of the Republican, kind of movement. And surely they're aware of that, right? I mean, that kind of politics must be okay with the family that controls the Wall Street Journal, right?
It's a good point, but the Wall Street Journal basks in the reputation of its reporters who are not right-wing hacks. They're very good reporters, and they do good work.
Right.
So, that's where the respectability comes in.
True.
If it was just Paul Gigot, it would be considered a very interesting magazine of opinion.
My reaction to Murdoch, I actually didn't hear what you just said, but it could be true. My reaction to Murdoch is, first of all, one thing I realized I hadn't thought about is, not that I'm the kind to go, on a recriminations crusade regarding the Iraq War, but there actually are few people, if you started listing people who got us into the Iraq War, there would be few people ranking above him on the list. He bankrolled the Weekly Standard, whose mission in life was to get us into Iraq, and which pursued that mission with admirable...
whose second mission is comprehensive immigration reform, which is the Iraq of domestic policy.
Thank you for sharing your views on that. And what I was going to go on to say was Fox News, whose mission in life was to get us into Iraq, and New York Post, whose mission in life was to get us, and it's funny, I don't even know, does he have American citizenship, or is this like a foreigner steering us into wars that turn out to be ill-advised?
He is an American citizen, Bob.
He is?
Don't be a xenophobic yahoo.
I
Yes.
can't be if he's an American citizen. I was hoping I could be, but I can't. Anyway, it seems to me it would not be poetic justice if he were rewarded with the, with getting the Wall Street Journal in his portfolio. On the other hand, then I thought, as I think you were suggesting, he might actually undermine the effectiveness of the editorial page if he pursued a strategy which he has sometimes in the past, which is to let his politics so infiltrate the straight news reporting that the whole publication or network or whatever loses broad-based credibility.
Has that ever happened? I don't think he's ever undermined his effectiveness. He does that, but I don't think it's ever undermined his effectiveness. And B, he's for Hillary. He's obviously he's obviously not attacked Hillary the way he could.
And they've obviously cut some sort of deal.
I refuse to believe he's for Hillary.
The way he cut a deal with Blair. He was for Blair,
If he's
too,
for Hillary and knows what he's doing, I have grave concerns about Hillary. I will say that. And I'm not convinced he's for Hillary. But, I mean, here's my point. Look, the Wall Street Journal's influence grows out of the fact that it has broad spectrum respect based on its reporting. And I think these business people in the Midwest who read it, they read the editorial page and the op-eds. I don't think they realize how far to the right that's kind of considered. It's a great newspaper, and it has reliable reporting and acute analysis, and they read these opinion pieces, and they think they're in the hands of greatness, and they are influenced by it, and that's the key to its success. So it's not like Fox News, which is just, preaching to the choir, basically, and just ginning up the base.
Right, but Rupert Murdoch owns the London Times. Has the London Times lost credibility because he owns it?
I think it has become cheesier in the straight news coverage.
Right.
I don't know if it's become and if he did that might hurt the Journal's credibility. I'm not sure that he has infiltrated its news pages with his politics the way, say, he has with the New York Post.
Well, but he seems to infiltrate everything with his politics. Certainly the scales have fallen from my eyes about Fox. I think Roger Ailes takes orders from the Bush administration. I don't think he's a journalist. I don't think, although he employs real journalists like Brit Hume, it's not a journalistic enterprise. It's a little like dealing with the mob. I mean, they're you can't tell, but they're at the bottom. They're not what they seem to be.
Who's that? Hamas? Did you say Hamas?
I said the mob.
Oh, the mob,
which is guaranteed to get me on Fox News. Again quickly, but not that they are criminal, but it is a fake enterprise in the sense that it seems to be a straight journalistic enterprise, and at bottom, it is some other kind of enterprise.
Mickey, I applaud that view.
This is as left as I get.
I know. It's a high point of the season, I would say.
I'm in the tank here with Glenn Greenwald.
Sounds like a makeup call, as they say about basketball refs, but I'm glad to hear you say it.
It's a total makeup call, but it's what I think, also.
Okay.
I got to milk it for all it's worth.
Okay, I've got a little house cleaning to do here.
Okay.
Got to read this email from this guy who says, I got it wrong about Yitzhak Rabin. I had said that he was, Prime Minister of Israel who was assassinated by right-wing extremists. I had said he was aware of the possibility that terrorists could wind up getting a nuke into Tel Aviv or something, and that's why he was so eager to solve the Palestinian problem.
Right.
This guy says he was concerned about the nuclear threat, but his big concern was that it would come from a nation state like Iran, and that's why he wanted to clear all the other problems off the table so he could deal with that. So far as I know, this guy's right and I'm wrong.
Okay.
If I had more time to research it, I might contest his view, but this email had the air of authority about it.
Okay.
I want to quickly say, should I say this?
I don't know what you're going to say, so I don't know whether you should say it. You're about to offer me a huge bonus to do every week.
Okay, I'll say that. No, actually, I'm not going to do that, but I do want to, in our comments section, there was a lot of interest in this tip jar possibility that I raised, because as people know, in a raw demonstration of your power, you've cut back your blogging heads to twice a month, and also to allow yourself to attend more Hollywood parties.
But I do it as much as anybody else aside from you, Bob.
I was going to say that in your defense. One of the viewers said, when I said, look, how about a tip jar, and every time it reaches, say, Mickey's tip jar, people can contribute. Every time it reaches, say, $200, you agree you'll do a third one each month. Some viewers wrote in, hey, why can't Mickey just chip in like everybody else? Well, nobody else does it more than twice a month, so I don't complain about this. I'm not complaining.
Right.
I think we should give you a financial incentive. It's just that the money shouldn't come from me. And so this tip jar possibility, first of all, I want to say a lot of viewers chimed in and really liked it. There was one guy said he himself would give $100 for something. Maybe he was saying toward an Ezra Mickey thing, which is a separate issue. We could have like a tip jar.
I thought that's what he was saying.
Right, could be. So we could have a tip jar, and when that gets up to like $500, that's the purse for the Ezra Mickey fight. And then the winner gets $400 and the loser $100 or something, something like that. How does that strike you?
Chump change in this day and age, Bob.
Well, I do think that you're in danger.
When it gets up to 50,000, give me a call.
I will let you know.
Okay.
But I do think you're in danger. If you hold out for too much money, I think your base could start growing disenchanted with you, Mickey.
I don't want to do this. So I'm perfectly happy to make outrageous financial demands.
You don't want to do the Ezra thing.
I don't particularly want to do the Ezra thing. No, life is short. One has to fight comprehensive immigration reform. That's the most important thing right now.
Okay, so we're back to Plan B.
Even more important than Blogging Heads TV.
Comprehensive immigration reform?
Fighting it is like Iraq for domestic policy.
Yeah, like what? You could write, like you need to write more blog items against it than you're already writing?
A crazy Bush plan that is going to wreak havoc on the country.
That's so silly. But anyway...
Why is that silly?
We should have you should have asked that question during the immigration section.
Well, you should have answered it during the immigration section.
Well, I just think you tend to get a little hysterical about immigration. I think that's your tendency. I think that this what is it, irredentist? Is that the word?
You don't live in Southern California, Bob, and you will soon.
Well, I doubt it, actually.
What I meant is that Southern California is going to come to you.
Oh, in the form of the Mexican hordes, you mean?
The Latin American hordes.
Oh.
They're not all Mexican, but they're largely Mexican.
We have a number of immigrants right here where I am, and they seem like nice people. But anyway,
they're all nice people.
Okay.
I'm not saying they're not nice people.
Okay. Look, I don't want to antagonize you right now because I'm throwing out these really intriguing and attractive prospects. So back to the generic form of the tip jar, where the amount gets up to a certain amount, and every time it does, you say, okay, I'll do a third one this month. What would that amount have to be?
Well, it would have to be in the multiple thousands of dollars.
Mickey.
Bob, I don't make that much money. If I'm going to do side projects, they have to be lucrative.
Do you actually have financial troubles right now?
No, but the rumor is that Andrew Sullivan makes $300,000. So since I make a whole lot less than that,
So you need to build up your traffic so that the Atlantic will hire you away from Slate.
Well, I don't. If I made in relation to Andrew Sullivan the ratio of my traffic to his, I would get a raise. Let's put it that way.
Okay, here's my fallback position. I also have this great idea.
$500 from the tip jar is not going to do it.
How much?
I said you had mentioned $500. That's not going to do it. But this is tedious for our viewers.
Actually, it was a favorite thing for them to chime in on last time.
Well, because they could beat up on me, but go ahead.
No, they were celebrating your greatness, Mickey. They love you.
Hey, we're
they were all saying, I would pay money to see Mickey. And that's really the question to you, is how can you bring pain to so many people's lives, Mickey?
We're approaching an hour and a quarter.
Okay, let me say one more thing. Fallback position, I had this idea that... okay, perfect segue. An hour and 15 minutes. Who needs that much of us in one day, Mickey? Nobody, right?
Right.
So the plan was, instead of saying, okay, we'll do these 6 topics, and it invariably drags on forever, we say we'll do these 4 topics. We insist on keeping it tight. We stop at like 47 minutes, and at that point, we close that file, open a new file, spend 25, 30 minutes on some hearty perennial topic, such as the one we had to keep short earlier on the whole question of, like, moral responsibility being conflated with an analysis of the causes of terrorism and so on. That, the mind-body problem, a couple of things with a long shelf life. And then, we show that a few days later, and your fans are gratified.
Well, but it seems to me that the second part will lack immediacy, and the first part will inevitably expand to an hour and 15. And this is the classic management speed-up, where they claim that they're going to keep it short, and we'll let you be part-time. Well, part-time turns out to be 40 hours a week. So, no.
Because you think I would not keep the first segment short.
I can see where that. I don't want to do it. The second one sounds like an incredible amount of work, and it lacks, the immediacy of something that you're not going to keep in the can for a week, and what has to be better, therefore. And I can't just slough it off by saying, hey, we're running out of time when you have me in a jam. So,
yeah.
I mean, what if I get the mind-body problem wrong? That would be bad.
That would.
I can't just say, hey, we got to move on.
That would.
Okay, so
even if your fans plead for this, you won't do it?
Anyway, I think we agree on the mind-body problem. No, come on, Bob. Why you? This is like people are really going to get sick of this haranguing guilt trip.
Should I tell them where the pause button is? We don't agree on the mind-body problem.
Management by guilty. Well, everything I know about it comes from you, so I have no basis with which to disagree.
Well, I think you've misinterpreted my position on that if you think you agree with me. But alas, we don't have time to continue it. It would be great if we did sometime, but I guess that's not in the cards.
We can talk about it next time.
I don't know.
Okay.
But I think you're right. If we held that a few days, it would lose its freshness.
It has to do with consciousness being a miracle. I thought that's your position.
Maybe you are close to the truth. Miracle's not the word I would use.
Yeah. Okay.
No, I wouldn't. I would make no such assertion, actually. But anyway, I'm afraid we're out of time.
Okay.
So have fun. Are you going to do any exotic dinner parties soon?
I don't think so. No. Sorry about that.
Yeah. Well, could you try to get invited to one within the next couple of weeks?
I actually just have to turn down one, but I'll try.
Okay.
Okay.
See ya.